Every athlete leaves something behind. Not just records, but moments that changed the way the game felt. Some stories are loud. This one isn't. Tonight, we slow it all down. And listen. This is Jalen Hurts. The silent rise of a relentless soul. He didn't say much as a boy. Didn't need to. There was something in the way he moved, deliberate, slow, like he knew where he was going before his feet touched the ground. In Houston, the air hangs thick. It wraps around you. In July, even the clouds seemed tired. He was just a kid then, small but steady. A football in his hand before anyone knew what that might mean. Most children talk too much. He didn't. He listened, to the game, to the silences between his father's whistles. There, in those spaces, something settled in him. They always said he had that look in his eyes. But no one ever said exactly what it was. Because maybe they couldn't name it. Maybe it was the fire that doesn't show up in flames, just a low, slow simmer. And on Saturday mornings, when the rest of the world was still sleeping off Friday night lights, Jalen Hurts was already studying shadows. No cameras, no applause, just cleats on damp grass and the breath of dawn. Even then, something was watching. Maybe it was greatness, maybe it was pain. The difference, sometimes, is only clear in hindsight. But on those mornings, it was just a boy and a ball. He didn't have dreams of glory. Not then. He had repetition. He had order. He had the knowledge that if something needed to be said, it would be said with action. So while others shouted, tweeted, flexed, he waited. Watched. Did it come from his father? From the long hours and longer silences between drills? Or was it born the moment he picked up the ball and never asked for anything else? You couldn't tell by looking at him. But there was pressure inside. A storm. Quiet. Focused. Unyielding. Jalen Hurts didn't burst onto the scene. He entered like wind through an open door. Felt, not seen. And yet the field knew. The ball knew. Somehow, the world had started turning with him in mind. He didn't know it yet. How could he? That the losses to come would shape him. That one day, entire cities would drape their doubt and belief over his shoulders. But even then, alone on that slick turf of a Texas morning, he carried something bigger than himself. Still, focused, waiting, and somewhere, gently, history began to lean a little closer. Before he was a name whispered under Friday night lights, he was simply Jalen, the coach's kid. At Channelview High School, that meant early mornings. It meant order. It meant never confusing comfort with love. His father, Avarian Hurts, deep voice, deeper standards, didn't need to say much. A whistle was enough, and Jalen responded. Every time. There was no fanfare in those workouts. No cameras tracking progress or scouts taking notes. Only the rhythm of drills, the same ones, over and over, like prayers folded into movement. Up before the sun, pads before breakfast, sweat before school. It was all understood. They didn't talk much between sets. But football has its own language. One built on glances, on silence, on trust. There's something profound about growing up where the coach lives in your living room. You don't get trophies for effort. You don't get sympathy for pain. You get better. Or you don't. And Jalen, he got better. Every rep, every drill, every quiet moment where he could have chosen rest, he didn't. Somewhere between 10-yard sprints and 2-a-days, something deeper took root. Not just skill, an ethic. Not just routine, devotion. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He trusted the process before the word became cliché. Long before it inked itself into headlines and hashtags. Back then, it was just a boy and his father. A stopwatch. An unspoken standard. His mother watched, too, soft voice, steady heart. She was the calm in a household built on discipline. And in her silence, Jalen learned resilience didn't always wear armor. Even then, he didn't crave attention. He craved clarity. Steps that made sense. Efforts that bore weight. His friends were out chasing distractions. Jalen chased balance, purpose. The weight room was never punishment. It was a ritual. And Jalen moved through it like a pilgrim, deliberate, reverent. Because somewhere inside, maybe he already understood. The future wasn't waiting to surprise him. It was waiting to be earned. And when the daylight broke through the fog outside those channel view fences, you could almost feel it, fate, pressing its palms to the glass. Watching, not just how fast he ran, but how little he ever looked away. Still, focused, unshaken, because in the Hertz household there were no shortcuts. Only the long road, measured in steps, not miles. And Jalen had already started walking. The helmet never quite fit. Too loose around the chin, too snug near the crown. But he put it on anyway, tightened the straps and never complained. Because Jalen Hurts wasn't after comfort. He was after conviction. And conviction isn't loud. It's steady. As a teenager, he was already studying more than playbooks. He was studying people, how they moved in pressure, how teams broke down when egos got loud and leaders got quiet. He never raised his voice in the huddle. He didn't need to. They listened because of how he looked at them, direct, open, honest. As if to say, I'll carry this if you follow. Junior year came like a test. Not of talent, that was obvious. But of temperament. Wins piled up, quietly. Losses lingered, deeply. But Jalen never flinched. After games, while teammates scrolled through posts and playlists, he sat still, helmet on his knee, gaze fixed on the far end of the field. You could almost hear the questions in his silence. Did I lead the right way? Did I leave anything behind? They say high school football in Texas is its own religion. But Jalen Hurts wasn't looking for worship. He was looking for order. He ran the offense like a watchmaker, precise, composed. And when things broke, he didn't panic. He recalibrated. The stands were never full. But he didn't play for noise. He played for rhythm, each snap part of a song only he could hear completely. And when they lost, he didn't blame. He analyzed. Because even then, you could sense it. Jalen Hurts wasn't being built for high school greatness. He was being shaped for something more patient, more permanent. Late Friday nights, long after the field lights dimmed, he would ride home in silence, window half open, head leaned back. What is a leader, really? Is it someone who talks the longest? Or someone who listens the hardest? He chose the latter, and it began to show. Teachers noticed the way he carried a quiet discipline into classrooms. Coaches leaned in when he spoke, not because he said much, but because he meant all of it. Even then, recruiters were beginning to whisper. A mobile quarterback, a steady presence, a rare composure. But still, doubt followed. Can his game translate? Too quiet, too different. But difference can be destiny, if it's nurtured, not feared. And that year, Jalen planted something that couldn't be measured in passing yards or touchdowns. It was conviction. It was leadership. And it was coming into bloom. Next year would be his breakout. But the revelation had already begun. He was learning not just how to win games, but how to bear weight, how to lift without asking. Still, focused, growing, and somewhere beyond the bright Texas skies, a voice from the southeast was getting closer. Alabama, Saban, the next test. A call that humbles most, but would only sharpen him. When the call came, it didn't echo. It arrived quiet, measured, like most things that matter. A simple offer from a place where the stakes are high and the patience low. Alabama, Nick Saban, the kind of name that rests heavy in a young quarterback's chest. Most boys would have shouted. Most families would have celebrated fast and loud. But not Jalen. He just nodded, like he expected it, even if he'd never dared to say it out loud. Tuscaloosa wasn't like home. Channelview had heat, dust, the subtle dignity of small-town grit. But Alabama? It had ghosts. Statues in stone. Tradition packed tight and passed down through cleats and pressure. When Jalen arrived, he was just another name on a roster of talent. A mid-level buzz in a program that didn't need saviors, just results. He didn't blink. He unpacked slowly, learned the halls, walked the weight room like it was a chapel. Because he knew, this wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about earning the right to stay. Head down, eyes up. That was the way. Still, the labels came fast. He's a runner. He's not built like our guys. Too careful, too calm. But they didn't know calm like he did. Calm that comes from repetition. From doubt turned into discipline. Calm that doesn't come because you're fearless, but because you've already faced silence and made peace with it. There were practices where the ball barely left his hand. Film sessions where he stayed long after the screen lost color. When others slept, he worked, not out of obsession, but out of respect. Respect for the program. Respect for the process. Respect for the whispers that followed him down every hallway. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't react when passed up in early depth charts. He just kept doing the work. Because that's what you do when you're not looking for fame, you're building foundation. And then, slowly, something shifted. There was a snap in fall camp. Receiver breaking out left. Pocket ready to collapse. Jalen stayed calm. Slid up. Released. Touchdown. The mood changed. Some of those eyes, those uncertain, calculating eyes, they started to look twice. And Jalen? He stayed the same. Because while he didn't show it, he felt it. The tide wasn't just crimson. It was starting to rise. And for the first time, the game wasn't just noticing him. It was beginning to lean his direction. He was 18, but he moved like he'd been there before. At Alabama, freshmen don't walk into starting roles. They wait, they watch, they wonder. Unless they're Jalen Hurts. His first snap under center didn't come with a spark. It came with a silence that said, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to earn this." And slowly, he did. Game by game, snap by snap. He didn't flash. He didn't fade. He held steady, like a compass pointing north even in stormlight. He became the first true freshman quarterback to start for Nick Saban. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by absorbing pressure without flinching. While others chased highlight reels, Jalen built trust. He learned to quiet 80,000 voices screaming at once by focusing on one, his own. Eyes under the visor told the story, still, unwavering, always scanning. Calculating more than coverage, calculating balance. He wasn't just managing games. He was composing them. By November, the tide was rolling, and Jalen was at the wheel. 12 wins, 1 loss. Control unshaken. But control is deceiving. Because at Alabama, the real judgment doesn't come in stats. It comes in the postseason. The playoff lights came on. Brighter, heavier. He kept playing like the moment didn't weigh more than a regular Saturday. Like the pressure belonged to someone else. In the semifinal, he ran. He passed. He led. Bama rolled. They said, "He's the future." But futures have a funny way of turning. The national championship arrived like a wave. Alabama versus Clemson. Everything on the line. He started calm, finished calm, but somewhere in between, the game began to slip. Completion by completion, Clemson clawed its way back. Jalen ran but struggled to throw. The field that had once bent for him, now pushed back. But he didn't shake, didn't pout. Even as the final seconds bled off the clock, Clemson scoring, Alabama stunned, he stood tall. He'd gone 13-1 as a freshman quarterback. Most would have been praised. He was questioned. Was he enough? The whispers grew louder than the crowd ever had. Quietly, he walked off the field. Off the national stage. Back into scrutiny. Not with a tantrum, nor tears. Just silence. Because loss is a language, too. And Jalen Hurts, he spoke it fluently. Not the kind that breaks you. The kind that forms you. Weights in your chest. Sharpens the edges of your poise. He didn't say much afterward, but you could feel what was coming. Not vengeance, something heavier, softer, a deeper kind of resolve. Still, focused, waiting. It came down to one night. The culmination of a season that hummed with near perfection. 13 wins, one quarterback, one calm, steady leader. And yet, in the national championship, there's no such thing as memory. Only this moment, this half, this snap. The stadium lights didn't blink. But something shifted. Somewhere deep inside the rhythm of the game, balance tilted. First incompletion, then pressure, then misread. Jalen Hurts had been here before. But this time, the field didn't open the same way. Passes floated, defenders tightened, momentum slipped silently out of his grasp. Halftime came like a pause he didn't ask for. And standing on the boundary, helmet in hand, he heard the decision. Not directly, not cruelly, but clearly. They were going with someone else. A freshman with flair, Tua, and just like that, he was on the sideline. The quarterback of a nearly undefeated team, benched in the most important moment of his life. The world reacts fast. Commentators lean in. Fans whisper. Social media erupts. But Jalen Hurts? He clapped. He cheered. He leaned into the huddle and whispered plays. He became the quietest anchor on the loudest night in college football. And when Tua, bright, bold, incredible, threw the game winner in overtime, Jalen was there. Not sulking, not vanished, but smiling, steady. There's a kind of strength that doesn't get drafted. A muscle built only by the weight of watching someone else live your dream, and lifting them anyway. In the locker room, questions swarmed. Was he done? Would he transfer? Would he break? But Jalen just buttoned his shirt, shook hands, and left the stage with the same poise that brought him there. No anger, no scandal, just a slow walk into the unknown, carrying something most of us run from. Humility. Because sometimes, history doesn't turn on who scores. It turns on who stays. And in the silence after the confetti fell, Jalen Hurts became something rarer than a champion. He became unshakable. He stayed. When others would have packed their bags and rewritten their narrative somewhere new, Jalen Hurts made what might have been the hardest choice. He didn't hit the portal. He hit the weight room, film sessions, practice fields, still leading, even without a title. Alabama belonged to someone else now. And Jalen belonged to the shadows. But not bitterly, not loudly. He stayed because his roots ran deeper than his pride. Because loyalty, to him, wasn't about position, it was about presence. Each morning, he showed up. Helmet in hand, notebook open, shoulders squared like he was still QB1. Because in his heart, preparation had nothing to do with status. And everything to do with standard. Tua's name rang louder. His stats sparkled brighter. But Jalen's silence said more. He clapped on touchdowns. Gave advice during timeouts, watched film not just to stay sharp, but to give others an edge. They called it grace, but it was grit, anchored, patient, long-suffering grit. The media barely mentioned him. Talk shows turned their eyes elsewhere. But his teammates? They saw it, felt it, respected it, because there's a kind of invisible leadership that can only be measured in how you act when the lights are no longer yours. He wasn't planning revenge. He wasn't waiting for someone to fail. He was mastering something. And when the season pressed forward, SEC title in reach, the story twisted. Tua went down, ankle twisted, crowd hushed, Georgia pressing, and the camera panned to Jalen. Warm-up jacket unzipped, helmet strapped, eyes forward. He didn't smile, didn't smirk, didn't whisper, "Now it's my turn." He ran on the field like he belonged, because he did. And in that moment, every representative he took in silent shadows, every uncelebrated morning he spent preparing came rushing toward the light. Because sometimes growth isn't about becoming someone new. It's about revealing who you've been becoming all along. And on that sideline, the quietest player in college football finally got loud. Not with words, with execution, with faith, with redemption steadily written, one snap at a time. It started like a memory someone tried to forget. Same teams, same stakes, different version of him. The SEC championship. Alabama, Georgia, Tua under center. Jalen wearing a headset, smiling, steady, watching. But then, an awkward step. A defender's wait. Tua limping. The trainers rushing in. The stadium paused. And for just a second, so did the story. Until a jacket unzipped. Until helmet met hands. Until Jalen Hurts rose. No swagger. No theatrics. Just readiness. He jogged to the huddle like someone coming home. Not rushed, not surprised. Calm. Centered. Exactly as he had prepared to be. The scoreboard didn't care. Neither did Georgia's defense. They pressed tight. Blitzed more than expected. Forced the pocket. But Jalen was different now. Sharper. Lighter. Still built like a runner. But now with reads like a veteran. Patience like a teacher. Snap. Second read. Strike. Completion. Again. Drive after drive. The rhythm returned. Not the rhythm Alabama remembered, but something evolved. Quieter. Cleaner. A rhythm he had cultivated in silence. And when the pocket finally collapsed, and Georgia defenders sniffed the sprint before it started, he rolled, and zipped one near the sideline. That whisper thread kind of pass only quarterbacks with scars can throw. Touchdown. And suddenly, what could have been a stumble, became something else entirely. A return. Not to the past, but to the version of himself molded by humility. They tied the game. Then they took the lead. And when the final whistle sealed it, when sweat met silence and the huddle broke for the last time that night, Jalen didn't point fingers or pound chests. He pointed up, shook hands, and walked with that same unhurried pace he'd carried in the shadows. Redemption stories are written many ways. Sometimes with vengeance, sometimes with spectacle. But his? It came through poise, through process, through waiting quietly until the world was ready to see what he'd never stopped becoming. He didn't ask for the moment. But when it came, he answered with everything he hadn't said in the year before. Every rep, every nod, every morning he didn't quit. And in the middle of Atlanta, under lights meant for someone else, Jalen Hurts whispered the loudest chapter of them all. He stood at midfield a little longer than usual. Helmet dangling from calloused fingers. Eyes tracing the outlines of a stadium he'd once dreamed of simply stepping into. Now, he was walking out of it. Not in defeat, not in bitterness, but in transformation. Tuscaloosa had poured him through fire and still found room to shape him. It had stripped some things away, pride, position, even the illusion of permanence. But it gave him something harder to lose, clarity. There was no press release yet. No official goodbye. But inside, he had already let go. Because sometimes, love means knowing when to leave. And sometimes, leaving is the most loyal thing you can do. To yourself, to your growth, to the story still waiting to be written. The whispers had already begun. Where next? Would he chase systems? Stats? A softer route? No. He chose Oklahoma. Not because it was easy. Because it was right. Norman offered familiarity. The same game in a different dialect. Quarterbacks thrived there. They matured fast under pressure, under Lincoln Riley's eye. But Jalen wasn't interested in keeping up with ghosts. He wasn't there to be the next Baker. The next Kyler. He came to be fully himself. The flight was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows decision. The calm that arrives when no one else has to understand. He landed with little fanfare. No procession. Just a duffel bag in his discipline. Some called it a comeback. But to Jalen, it was continuation. Because sometimes growth doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like peace. And in Oklahoma's red earth, peace waited for him like an open field. He arrived beneath a sky that seemed to stretch wider. Oklahoma was open in a way Tuscaloosa never was. Not just the land, but the air around him. There was space here, to breathe, to begin, and so he did, quietly, deliberately. He wasn't the savior, wasn't the sequel. He was Jalen Hurts with something to prove, but to no one else but himself. Lincoln Riley watched with a quiet knowing. There was talent, but more than that, timing. And together, they began to write something new. The first few snaps were cautious, almost reverent. Not from fear, but from respect. For the system, for the moment. Then, it changed. Touchdowns came with rhythm, rollouts with precision, games with calm brutality. He processed fast, moved faster. And every week, every highlight, every breathless stat line, the world leaned in. Was this the same kid from Alabama? No, not quite. This was someone refined, someone released, an engine built in silence, finally revving free. He didn't crow, didn't posture. He smiled more, but it was the same old fire behind the eyes. He was being watched again. And now, he welcomed it. The numbers piled up like dream logic. Hundreds of passing yards, dozens of broken tackles, a Heisman conversation he didn't chase, but one that couldn't ignore him. Every throw told two stories, one of presence and one of past. He hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be benched. That moment still lived somewhere behind his poise. But now, he wasn't answering critics. He was answering purpose. Still, the whispers began again. Not about college, about the next level. He's a great college quarterback, but the NFL? The doubts didn't surprise him. He'd heard them before, and he knew they weren't really about talent. They were about fit, image, tradition. He didn't throw like the pros wanted. Didn't talk like them either. Too composed, too careful, too calm. But Jalen never reshaped himself to fit a narrative. He reshaped narratives. While scouts measured mechanics and footwork, he kept preparing. Not just his arm, his mind. Because the next level wouldn't ask him to be flashy. It would ask him, once again, to wait. To earn. To trust that the fire inside, the one still burning low and steady, would be enough. He didn't participate in the noise. Didn't campaign for position. He kept showing up. Film, practice, reps, quiet excellence. Because he knew, the game always notices. Eventually. And when the draft came, not early, not headlined, he stood ready. Not for the cameras. For the work. They said it quietly, but not kindly. He's not an NFL quarterback. Great kid. Great leader. But always seemed to hang heavier than the compliment. Too much of a runner. Too calm under fire. Too hard to define. They graded his tape with furrowed brows. Mechanics? Questionable. Progressions? Delayed. Arm strength? Serviceable. But somehow, they missed the silence between the snaps. The way he moved when it mattered. The way the game slowed for him. Not just on the field, but in his mind. He heard it all, didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't tweet out workouts or post highlight reels cut to adrenaline tracks. He just stayed quiet, kept working. The combine came. He stood tall, answered every question with calm eyes and steady words. He never promised greatness, never sold a dream. He offered something rarer, consistency. Still, the draft boards didn't shift. Franchise quarterbacks went early. Names with louder stats, flashier arms, quicker feet. He watched, waited, not from the green room, not from the stage, from a room somewhere quiet, family near, his name folded into the air like a prayer waiting for its amen. Round 1 came, passed. Round 2 moved fast. Team after team choosing futures he wasn't part of. Still, he waited, not bitter. Not unsure, just ready, until pick 53, a breath, a pause, and then, Jalen Hurts, quarterback, Oklahoma. There it was. Not with fireworks, not with celebration, but with conviction. Philadelphia, a city of raised eyebrows and high expectations. Blue collar, louder than most, loyal to few, and they already had a quarterback. A franchise guy, paid, protected, believed in, but now, they had Jalen too. The analysts blinked. The fit? They asked. The purpose? Maybe a gadget guy, they said. A backup plan. But Jalen Hurts had never been a plan B. He was a long arc. A slow burn. A story built not for the beginning, but for the middle. The hard parts. He took a picture that night. Smiled. Held up a jersey he hadn't yet earned. And then? He went back to the gym. Because being doubted didn't sting. Being drafted didn't satisfy. Not yet. His story hadn't ended. It hadn't even started. And the quiet fire inside him? It was still burning. There was no champagne. No green room photo op. No stage walk under glowing lights. Just a room, quiet, ordinary, filled with ordinary people holding an extraordinary truth. Pick 53. Philadelphia Eagles. A name spoken softly into a space that had waited too long to hear it. Jalen Hurts. No celebration soared into the air. No music blasted through hidden speakers. Just a handshake, a nod, and a calm that had traveled with him through every step, every doubt, every silent morning since Texas. He smiled. Not wide, not boastful, just enough. Because it wasn't the moment that made it real. It was everything before it. They said he was a backup. Said Philly already had its guy. Franchise quarterback. Franchise paycheck. Wentz. This was insurance. Nothing more. But Jalen didn't see it that way. He never wanted anyone else's role. He just wanted presence. One snap at a time. He flew east quietly. Handed a jersey. Smiled for the cameras. Shook hands with the staff. But in his mind, he'd already moved on. To the playbook. To meetings. To the work. He wore number 2 again. Not as a statement, but as a reminder. There is no entitlement in the waiting. Philadelphia wasn't waiting for him, either. The city was hard. Its love is forged in cold wind and blunt truth. Its quarterbacks are judged on Sundays, not smiles. He knew that going in. He wasn't there to win the crowd. He was there to win the room. The locker room, the film room, the weight room. He watched Carson lead, took notes, took nothing for granted. When they called scout team reps, he ran them like game day. When they handed him a clipboard, he held it like it mattered. Because it did. Every representative mattered, even the ones no one documented. Especially those. He wasn't chasing status. He was absorbing system, pausing before every pounce. And around him, things began to shift. Not dramatically, not publicly, but those watching closely, teammates, coaches. They saw the poise, the rhythms, the invisible leadership. He took no sides, only steps. And then, something cracked. Injury, underperformance, franchise quarterback, suddenly fractured in threads no one could stitch quickly enough. And Jalen? Still waiting, still steady. Until one week in December they called his name. Not as a gadget, not as an experiment, as the starter. The moment was quiet, but the energy changed. He walked into the huddle like he'd always belonged there. Because he had, not in headlines, not in fan chatter, but in the process. Because Jalen Hurts didn't arrive to take anything. He came to build. And when the ball left his hands, spiraling under winter skies that bite skin and shake confidence, it didn't herald revolution. It whispered something softer, stronger. I'm ready. He didn't take the job. It was never announced as his. Carson Wentz was still the face, the investment, the plan. Jalen Hurts was the backup, the contingency. On paper. But paper never told the full story. Week after week, things unraveled. Throws missed their marks. Decisions clouded by pressure, by noise. Philadelphia, hungry and unforgiving, started to murmur. And all the while, Jalen waited. Helmet in hand, clipboard on the sideline, eyes always watching, learning patterns, not just plays. When you study storms long enough, you start to understand the wind. And suddenly, the wind shifted. Late in the season, late in a game already slipping. A substitution. Subtle, sudden, electric. Number 2 jogged onto the field. Not with flash, but with focus. The first snap was nothing spectacular. No touchdown, no trickery. But the huddle changed. The body language, the breath, even the silence felt different. He moved through progressions with calm urgency. Rolled when needed, stayed when he should. And most importantly, he listened. To coaches, to teammates, to the rhythm no stat sheet can capture. By the next week, he was the starter. Not named in stone, but there. The team responded. The offense smoothed. The energy settled. And in a city where patience is rare and opinions louder than traffic, something unexpected happened. They paused, listened, watched this new quarterback lead without demanding. Jalen wasn't the solution to every problem, but he was a presence. Resolved, steady, unshaken by scrutiny. He didn't speak much, but each play whispered something Philly understands better than most. Earned, not given. He ran when needed, threw when time allowed, took hits without drama, gave credit without pause. And in a city built on hard labor and harder expectations, they started to see something familiar in him. Toughness that didn't brag, work ethic that didn't sleep, fire that didn't flicker under pressure. Carson's era ended not with a bang, but with a slow, steady turning. And in his absence, what stood wasn't noise or spectacle. It was Jalen, not crowned, not declared, simply standing, doing the work, carrying the weight, and earning the trust of a city that gives nothing cheap. Philadelphia didn't fall in love easily. But they knew who showed up. And Jalen Hurts? He kept showing up. Again, and again, and again. He didn't change. Didn't spike the ball or dance in the end zone. Didn't pound his chest. He just walked back to the sideline, nodded once, and blended in. Philadelphia noticed. At first, with skepticism. The kind born from too many promises, too many letdowns. They'd seen quarterbacks talk before leading. Jalen led, and talked only when necessary. He answered questions like passes, direct, no wasted motion. Every sentence felt thought out, worn in his mind before it touched air. The city tested him. Every mistake weighed twice. Every win dissected. They looked at his numbers, sure. But they studied his posture harder. He kept coming back the same, shoulders level. Voice even. Eyes ahead. It wasn't charisma that earned the locker room. It was consistency. Veterans whispered about how often he showed up before everyone. How he stayed late, correcting small details most wouldn't see. Not to impress. To be right. The Eagles were shifting. Not just schematically, but spiritually. For every big play, Jalen offered credit like a plate passed down a long dinner table. Linemen, receivers, coaches, everyone got a piece. Because in that huddle, hierarchy disappeared. Only preparation mattered. When he ran, it wasn't to escape. It was to create. When he threw, it wasn't to show off. It was because the read said go. Philadelphia, loud, raw, brutally honest, started to mirror his restraint. Not silent but listening. Not gushing but nodding. There was a kind of reverence forming, a respect not declared but practiced. In barber shops, in living rooms, in late-night debates over cheesesteaks and box scores. Was he the guy? Week by week, the maybe faded. Not because he convinced the city with words. Because he kept carrying its weight like it was his obligation. Not performance art, just performance. He walked into every game like he owed someone something. And maybe he did. Maybe to himself. Maybe to those quiet mornings in Texas with no cameras and no cheers. Or maybe he just understood. Leadership isn't earned once. It's re-earned daily. In fourth quarters when everything tightened, he didn't blink. No panic, no surprise. He moved like he'd seen it all before. Probably because, in some way, he had. And the city, used to heartache, allergic to easy, started to believe. Not in hype, in habit. Because Jalen Hurts didn't demand Philadelphia's trust. He made it unnecessary to withhold. In 2022, he arrived with the same silence he always carried. No bold prediction, no media campaign, just a focus so sharp it cut through preseason noise and left only questions he intended to answer with action. The season crept in, slow, deliberate, and with every snap, it became harder to deny. Jalen Hurts wasn't guessing anymore. He was reading. Coverages slowed for him. Defenses bent. Timing aligned. There was something cold and methodical in his play. Like a craftsman refining his tool, not for show, but for inevitability. He threw when others would run. Ran when others dared him to pass. He slid between defenders the way a pianist finds the lonely notes, soft, sure, intentional. The Eagles began to soar. Not in bursts, but in rhythm. By mid-season, they were unbeaten. By December, pundits were hedging bets. Some said system, some said schedule, but those who really watched saw the truth. Poise had taken flight. Teammates reflected it. Receivers ran crisper routes. O-linemen blocked with more belief. Coaches whispered in meetings. They trusted the hands under center more than ever before. And while the scoreboard told one version of the story, his posture told another. When they won, he barely smiled. Just nodded once and walked off quiet. When they lost, a rare thing, he didn't point. He recalibrated. The word began to surface. MVP. He never said it himself. Never leaned into the swell of attention. When asked about it, he simply returned fire with humility. I'm just doing my job. And that was the magic of it. To him, greatness wasn't mystical. It was built, earned, layered through ritual and readjustment. He finished the regular season with numbers that sparkled, but they weren't the centerpiece of his case. It was how he moved when games got tight. Third and long, red zone, fourth quarter tide turning. The pocket collapsed, and he never did. Instead, he stepped, reloaded, released. He didn't seem hurried. He seemed prepared. 14 wins. 1 loss as the starter. And still, he didn't shout. Didn't call for crowns or confetti. Because Jalen Hurts wasn't chasing trophies. He was building alignment between who he was, who he had become, and the expectation he refused to buckle under. He didn't want to be decorated. He wanted to be dependable. And when the playoffs whispered next, he didn't flinch. He just pulled on the jersey, cracked open the playbook one more time, and sharpened his silence into something inevitable. Because the season's final test wasn't MVP voters. It was something larger, something waiting beneath the desert lights. And he was ready to meet it. Not with noise, with purpose. Glendale. Where the desert air doesn't cool, even at night. Where the lights burn longer than the sun. Super Bowl 57. Jalen Hurts stood alone for a moment, helmet in hand, soaking in everything and nothing. There were no nerves, just presence. A quiet, steady breath before history asked its question. From the first whistle, he answered. He moved with intention, slow when needed, sudden when provoked. The field bent to his rhythm. The biggest stage became quiet. Touchdown. Another. Then one more. 3 rushing scores. Over 300 yards of total offense. No panic. No rush. Only control. And yet, in one blink, things turned. A fumble. The kind that steals moments. Stripped clean. Not just from his hands, but from momentum. And Kansas City didn't blink. They returned it. 7 points. A heartbeat of regret. But even then, he didn't unravel. He returned to the sideline, teeth clenched but eyes focused. And when the offense took the field again, He led like it was the first drive. Snap, read, move, create. Fourth quarter. Tied, then behind, then tied again. Each possession, urgent, precise, patient. But time, like pressure, never waits. Final drive. Down 3. One last chance. He moved them forward, ran when space opened, threw into windows that didn't exist until he believed they would. And when they stood inches from tying everything, he crossed the goal line without celebration. Just business. A bring it back to zero kind of touchdown. They lined up for 2. The stakes, total. And he took it himself. Lowered his shoulder. Pushed through shadows. Conversion good. Tied. Again. But it wasn't enough. With seconds trickling away, a penalty extended Kansas City's drive. A chip shot sealed it. The clock bled out. The confetti fell, red and yellow, the wrong colors. And Jalen stood there, not in disbelief, but in understanding. He had played one of the greatest quarterback games in Super Bowl history. And lost. But there were no tears. No blame. No folded posture. Just a handshake. A stare to the sky. A whisper no mic could catch. Because it wasn't about revenge. Or validation. It was about clarity. He knew who he was. So did his teammates. So did the city that once doubted, now resolute beside him. That night, he didn't hoist a trophy. But he carried something else away, something not weighed in silver. Respect, undeniable, global, not just for his stats, but for his patience, his resolve, the way he walked off the biggest stage like a man still climbing. Still, focused, unshaken. $255 million. A number that echoed through headlines, across ticker tapes, into locker rooms and boardrooms. A number heavy with expectation. Dense with implication. For a moment, Jalen Hurts was the highest paid player in the NFL. But he didn't flinch, didn't celebrate, didn't even pause. He walked into the facility the next day at the same time. Before sunrise. Before anyone else. Coffee, film, silence. Because for him, the money wasn't the measure. It was acknowledgement of the grind, the patience, the belief he never had to broadcast. Most saw the zeros. He saw the responsibility. He didn't buy a spotlight. He buried deeper into the shadows, sharpening what needed to be sharper. Slowing what needed stillness. Not one teammate noticed a sudden shift in demeanor. Because there wasn't one. His handshakes felt the same. Weight room reps the same. The questions in quarterback meetings came just as quietly, just as clearly. There was no gold in his voice. Just gravel. Because Jalen Hurts never played the part. He built it, brick by disciplined brick. And this contract? It didn't free him. It focused him. They called him a franchise quarterback. But Jalen didn't put faith in titles. He put it in Tuesdays, the cold ones, in between storylines, when no cameras were pointing. He talked more about protections than possessions. More about film study than investment portfolios. Some asked what he would do with the money. He smiled once, softly. I'll keep showing up. Because legacy isn't a signature on a dotted line. It's repeat behavior under weight. And with the ink still drying, the first thing he did? Get back to work. He met with coaches, lined up calls, rechecked his own tape from games everyone else had tried to forget. Because the job hadn't changed. The target on his back had grown. The headlines louder. The expectations breathless. But he knew who he was before the contract. And he'd be the same after it. Still. Focused, not motivated by money, grounded by mission, because Jalen Hurts doesn't chase rewards. He becomes undeniable, until they have no choice but to arrive. Quietly, exactly like he did. It was never the touchdowns. Not really. It was the hours no one saw, when the lights in the weight room flickered before sunrise, when film ran on loop in an empty room long after practice ended. When the only sound was a pencil scratching adjustments in the margins. That's where the real Jalen Hurts lived. Far from cameras, far from post-game podiums and viral clips, he studied, lifted, corrected. Success, to him, wasn't performance. It was preparation. He broke down coverages like a language, not memorized, but translated, feeling out the subtleties others skimmed past. He didn't chase perfection. He stalked improvement. Every day. They said he was gifted, as if it happened by accident, as if God handed out pocket awareness and leadership traits at random. But if you tracked the steps backwards, you wouldn't find miracles. You'd find patterns. Alarms set earlier than most. Workouts chosen when rest was offered. Silence when easy applause came calling. Because for Jalen, the game didn't start at kickoff. It started in the unseen hours, where sweat earned what hype only promised. There were stories of him correcting footwork on his own, rehearsing a rollout again and again in an empty corridor, not because someone told him to, but because he knew it wasn't right yet. No one applauds that, and that's why he did it. Because when Sunday arrived, he didn't lean on adrenaline or momentum, he leaned on memory. Muscle memory built through boredom, through repetition forged into instinct. He carried that into every meeting, every snap, every misstep. Always learning, always correcting, never rattled, failing forward, not loudly, but efficiently. He wasn't chasing a moment. He was chasing mastery. There's a gravity to men like that. A quiet certainty that can't be taught, only earned. Teammates felt it. Coaches leaned on it. Opponents noticed it too late. Because while others trained for applause, he trained for alignment, mind, body, purpose, synced. That's the difference. Not the stats. Not the sprint speed or the press conferences. But the discipline so private, it turns greatness into routine. Still, focused, becoming. There's a moment no one talks about. Not a throw. Not a run. Just Jalen. Standing in an empty hallway. Jersey still damp, helmet in one hand, phone in the other. He wasn't scrolling, just holding it, staring at the screen like it had become a mirror. It wasn't after a win. Or a loss. Just Tuesday. The grind day. The in-between. Where games are still film, and glory still distant. And that's the part people skip. Because greatness doesn't bloom in lights. It settles in the mundane. In the way he re-watches film like it's scripture. How he finds the flaw in a completed pass. How he pauses, rewinds, watches the small things. The twitch of a defender's hip, the depth of a receiver's break. He takes nothing at face value. Not his stats, not the praise, not even his own progress. They say he's a dual threat. But his real weapon is clarity. He sees the game in layers. Feels pressure before the pocket caves. Moves not to escape, but to navigate. And when he throws, it's not just mechanics. It's memory. Of every failed rep, every corrected angle. The weight room hears him most. Not shouting, not clanging plates. Just breath, rhythm, pattern, up, down, reset. He doesn't lift to impress. He lifts to control. To stay ready not just for the snap, but for the season, the scrutiny, the silence after a tough loss. Coaches don't have to ask. He's already done the work. Teammates follow without being told. Because leadership like his doesn't walk in loud. It shows up early, and stays late. He takes notes, still. Not because he forgets, but because writing makes it real. Even now, years in, millions earned. Playoff berths behind him. He approaches each meeting like he's walking into a classroom for the first time. Because the goal was never arrival. It was refinement. Some stars crave spotlight. He craves structure. A better pre-snap read. Cleaner footwork on third down. A deeper chemistry with the backup tight end. That's how he thinks. Not headlines. Margins. Not branding. Balance. And when he's alone, when the room's finally quiet, he sits with the day. Replays conversations. Rethinks decisions. He doesn't fear doubt. He minds it. Because somewhere inside, that quiet fire still burns. Not brighter, deeper, smoldering in the cracks between routine and revelation. Still, focused, learning. Some players chase legacy. He lives it, quietly, with each snap, each step, whether watched or not. Because to Jalen Hurts, greatness isn't a destination. It's a discipline. It's not in rings or records. It's in the way he ties his cleats, the way he writes notes in margins, the way he speaks only when there's something worth saying. He doesn't need the last word. He needs the next representative. Some quarterbacks wait for approval. Jalen waits for alignment. And when it clicks, when vision meets urgency, when preparation meets moment, he doesn't explode. He expands. The field opens wider. The clock ticks slower. And somehow, everything feels inevitable. It's not flash. It's frequency. A mind that returns to the moment again and again, not for glory, for precision. The crowd may shout. The critics may spin. But Jalen stays steady. Because he doesn't need confirmation. He trusts calibration. Every season brings noise, shifts, setbacks, surges. But he never rushes the rise. He builds it, repetition by repetition, like a carpenter who knows the weight of every nail. And with each fall, each fumble, he doesn't see failure. He sees footage, tape to study, angles to correct, weakness to refine, because real quarterbacks don't lead with bravado. They lead with bandwidth, emotional, mental, physical. And Jalen's? Always wide open. Sometimes his play offends expectations, too calm, too efficient to feel dramatic. But drama doesn't win drives. Composure does. Reps do. He's felt the bench, felt the blame, watched others raise trophies he helped build paths toward. Still, he returns, not bitter, sharpened. And when the season tests his mettle, again, always again, he meets it with the same quiet declaration. Still, focused, here, whether the road leads to titles or trials, he walks it the same. With breath-controlled purpose, with pain-earned poise, with that low burning fire. The kind that refuses to die because it never needed a flame to begin with.